Welcome to our broadcast of University of Texas Broadcast Channel. I'm Tom Parker, and today we're going to be talking about a House and Senate race in our 9th largest state in the country, North Carolina. To begin, we have a Senate race between Republican incumbent Richard Burr and Democrat challenger Deborah Ross. Along with that, we have a House District 13 that is also facing a very competitive race with Republican Ted Budd and Democrat Bruce Davis facing off. Neither of those two are incumbents, so it should keep viewers well occupied this election day. Now, it's important to remember that North Carolina is a state filled with a lot of political polarization. A lot of this stems from their enhanced voter registration laws that their state legislature tried to pass. In response to that, a political liberal group started a civil case that went all the way through the Supreme Court that eventually led to the demise of the attempt at these enhanced laws. Now, it's important to also go back to the 2012 election, in which North Carolina hosted the second smallest, largest margin of victory in any state, and those votes actually went to Mitt Romney. Now, in 2008, the state went Democratic to President-elect Barack Obama. So with all that in mind, the state is definitely a battleground in these two races. So with that, we bring you to our Republican correspondent, Ben Meredith, to talk about his candidate, Richard Burr.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here. Well, first I'd like to point out that Richard Burr is the incumbent, and as we know, incumbents' chances of winning are higher than the challenger, even a quality challenger like Deborah Ross, and his name recognition is higher due to his incumbency. Also, Richard Burr has raised $11 million and only spent $4.4 million, which is $2.6 million less than Deborah, and he has even raised $3 million more. This is good because this means that Burr is confident in his chances of winning, and there's a correlation of incumbents spending less and defeating their opposition because they don't feel as threatened. In fact, most recent polling has him up around 2%, and if Trump's numbers continue to rise in North Carolina, Burr could ride the presidential coattails to office. In fact, also I'd like to point out that Richard Burr has served in the House of Representatives for 5 terms and in the Senate for 2 terms, which makes him one of the most experienced senators on Capitol Hill. In the Senate, Richard serves as chairman of the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and sits on the Health, Education, Labor, and the Finance Committee, all of which he can use to benefit the residents of North Carolina.
Thank you again, Mr. Meredith, for joining us tonight. Now we're going to bring you our Democratic correspondent, Kate Ferguson at the Deborah Ross camp.
Hi Tom, thanks for having me on. I'm here at Deborah Ross's campaign headquarters going into election night. Ross still feels confident in her chances tonight despite polls showing her behind going into election day. Ross is what we like to call a quality challenger, as she previously served in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Her primary victory was a decisive one and raised almost $8 million throughout her campaign season. Ross additionally has been endorsed by many of the country's most liberal groups, including Planned Parenthood and Emily's Group. The DNC has poured almost $400,000 into her race following her strong performance in the debate against Richard Burr, where she surged in the polls and maintained a lead for several weeks. Ross has been a longtime supporter of Democratic causes and once served as the state's director for the American Civil Liberties Union. Despite lagging in the polls, her name recognition could lead to a late surge, but only later today's polls and results will tell. Thanks.
And here we're going to bring you our senior political correspondent from Iowa. She's working on the presidential campaign, Kaylin Dimitrov. She also has some valuable insight on that competitive House District 13 race I was talking about between Republican Ted Budd and Democrat Bruce Davis.
Hey y'all, it's Kaylin Dimitrov. I am our senior political correspondent up here in Polk County, Iowa. So I got some updates in on North Carolina's 13th District Congressional race. So, back in 2014, when Graham Holding, incumbent Republican, announced that he would not run for re-election, it became immediately a very viable spot for new Republicans. Over 20 people filed to run in the primary. Eventually, Ted Budd became the nominee, winning 20.4% of the vote, beating out challengers who respectively got 10.4% each, John Bloust and Hank Henning. Budd's close ties to the NRA, his pro-life and pro-family stances, along with his responsible fiscal policy, make him a very, very good candidate in this strongly Republican county. His challenger, Bruce Davis, though he squeaked out a win in the primary, coming up with 25.7%, 0.6% better than his closest challenger, Bob Eisner. He is from High Point, North Carolina. He served as a Marine. Fortunately, the Davis campaign suspended operations on October 21st. They lost their website domain, they've ceased donations, so looks like Ted Budd is going to ride into this solidly come November 8th. So just looking at North Carolina, should be pretty safe deal. Thanks, guys.
And next, live from the polls, we're going to bring you our best polling analyst, Rob Montgomery, to give you a prediction on this House and Senate race.
Thank you, Tom. Tonight we are here at one of the polling locations just hours before they are set to close. The final numbers from our friends over at Real Clear Politics show Republican Richard Burr is leading 2 points over the Democratic challenger, Deborah Ross. Turnout is high and record numbers have come out to vote in this year's election. Contrary to previous years, new voters may not be turning out to vote for the Democrats, but rather the Republicans, suggesting a good night for the GOP. North Carolina is a state made up of 2.7 million registered Republicans and 2 million registered Democrats. The 13th district where we are tonight has traditionally gone to the Republicans and leans 9 points to the right in registered voters. Last year, incumbent George Holding won by 57% over his Democratic challenger. Early voting numbers seem to suggest Republicans are doing well in this year's election, as early voting white voters is up 22.5%, while African Americans early voting turnout is down 8.5%. What this leads us to believe is the Senate and House races here in North Carolina will be a decisive GOP victory, with estimates of Burr winning 2.5% of the vote and Ted Budd winning with 4% of the vote in Congressional District 13.
Once again, thank you for joining us all tonight on the University of Texas Broadcasting Channel. I'm Tom Parker. I wish you a wonderful election night, and I hope to see you soon.